He didn't go looking for trouble. He went into the mountains for silence. But when his dog stopped, growling at something half buried in the frost, Dan Crawford realized silence had just ended. The morning air bit like glass. Pale mist drifted through the pines, curling around the trunks like smoke from a dead fire. The Bitterroot Range stretched beyond sight, cold and blue, its peak sharp as broken bone. Dan adjusted the strap of his rifle, feeling the leather creak beneath his glove. Every movement was muscle memory, routine, steady, precise. He had done this 100 times before. But today, something felt off. The forest was too quiet. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. For 10 years, the mountains had been his refuge. After the fire that killed his partner, after the hospital, the endless questions, the sympathy he couldn't stand, he disappeared. Sold everything. Built a cabin with his own hands. Chose silence over people. The woods didn't ask, didn't pity. They just were. And for a man like Dan, that was enough. His only companion was Bear, a massive black Labrador with eyes too human for comfort. They understood each other the way survivors do, without words. Bear knew when to stay close and when to wander. When to sleep, and when to lift his head at sounds only he could hear. That morning, he was restless. Kept pacing near the tree line, nose to the wind, muscles tense. Dan watched him, uneasy. "Easy, boy," he muttered, though his own voice felt too loud against the stillness. The frost crackled under his boots as he moved toward the ridge. Sunlight hadn't yet burned through the mist. Everything glowed silver, unreal, suspended between night and day. He stopped beside an old pine, listening. There it was again. A sound, distant, metallic, faint as a memory. Like steel tapping stone. Once. Twice. Then silence. Bear's ears twitched. A low growl rumbled in his chest. Dan frowned. "Probably a rock slide," he whispered, but didn't believe it. No rocks fell in rhythm. No echo like that lived in these woods. He turned slowly, scanning the slope below. Nothing moved. Just the blur of trees fading into fog. But something was there. Watching. Listening back. By noon, he reached a clearing where a thin stream ran beneath sheets of ice. He built a small fire, boiled coffee, and sat beside Bear. Steam rose from the tin cup, curling like ghost breath. The forest seemed calm again. Almost normal. Almost. He tried to shake it off. The noise, the tension, the way the air felt heavier than usual. But the feeling stayed, like pressure before a storm. When dusk came, the world turned blue-gray and quiet again. He lay in his tent, eyes half-closed, listening to the crack of cooling branches and the distant cry of an owl. Routine sounds. Safe sounds. Until Bear stirred. The dog's breathing shifted, from calm to alert. A deep growl rippled through the tent walls. Dan froze. Then heard it. Crunch. A heavy step on frost. Then another. Then nothing. He waited, heartbeat drumming in his ears. Minutes stretched into forever. And just as his eyelids began to droop, it came again. That hollow metallic ring, somewhere up the slope, faint but deliberate. Bear snarled softly. Dan reached for the rifle beside him. His breath clouded the air. He whispered, barely audible. "Whatever you are, stay where you are." Outside, the wind moved once more through the trees. Slow, measured, almost human. The fog never really left. It just settled lower, heavier, as if the forest was holding its breath. Dan packed his gear at dawn. The world was silver and still. Even Bear's collar sounded too loud in that kind of quiet. They moved through the timber like ghosts, two shapes fading in and out of mist. Every branch dripped. Every sound echoed. And somewhere ahead, the echo of metal waited. By mid-morning, frost melted into wet earth. Their boots sank deep into mud laced with pine needles. Bear stopped often, nose twitching, eyes scanning the ridges. Something had him on edge. Something unseen. Dan studied the ground. Tracks, old deer, elk maybe. But over them, faint and strange, a straight line of crushed moss. Not animal. Not natural. A drag mark. He followed it. The trail curved downhill through tangled roots, ending in a shallow ravine shrouded in fog. At first, he thought the shape ahead was just rock. Then the line of it caught the light. Smooth, curved, unnatural. Metal. Dan froze. Bear whined softly, tail low. He took one cautious step forward, then another. The shape grew clearer, a massive hull half buried in dirt and moss. A rotor blade jutted from the ground like a broken wing. A helicopter. Or what was left of one. The color had faded to olive gray, streaked with rust. Vines crawled through shattered windows. The air smelled of wet iron and oil, a scent that didn't belong here. Dan circled slowly, hand brushing the cold frame. The surface was scarred, pitted, dented, an impact that should have torn it apart. But there were no burn marks, no explosion. It looked as if it had simply fallen, and then been forgotten. Jesus, he murmured. Bear sniffed at the open doorway, hackles rising. Dan shone his flashlight inside. Dust floated like ash in the beam. 2 seats. One torn. The other empty, belt still fastened, as if someone had vanished mid-flight. He stepped inside. The air was colder here. Thick with silence. Panels ripped open. Cables hanging like veins. And on the floor, scratches, deep, parallel, desperate. Someone had been here after the crash. Someone searching. Dan crouched, brushed away leaves. His fingers struck metal. A box, steel, heavy, sealed with a rusted latch. He pulled it free, coughing as dust swirled around him. Stamped into its side, property of US Gov. No serial, no unit, nothing else. He tried the latch. It wouldn't budge. Sealed tight. Outside, the forest had gone utterly still again. Even the fog seemed to pause. Dan set the box on the moss and straightened, scanning the ground. That's when he saw them. Footprints. Not his. Not old. Boot prints, deep and defined, leading away from the wreck into the trees. 2 pairs. Recent. The hair on his arms lifted. No one came out here. No hikers, no hunters, no patrols. To reach this place, you had to know exactly where to look. He felt Bear press against his leg, trembling slightly. Yeah, Dan whispered. I feel it too. He hoisted the box onto his shoulder and started up the slope. The fog thickened, wrapping them like gauze. The woods seemed to watch their every step. By the time he reached the ridge, the sun had already begun to fade. He built a fire, small and careful. The box sat beside him, catching the orange light. The metal looked wrong in this world of bark and flame. Too clean, too deliberate. Bear lay close, eyes fixed on the dark beyond the firelight. The forest made no sound. Dan poured coffee, staring into the flames. Whatever you are, he muttered to the box, you weren't meant to stay lost. Then Bear's ears twitched. A soft movement. Far off, between the trees. A flicker of light, small, steady, moving. Dan froze. Not a star. Too low. Too controlled. A flashlight. Someone was out there. He reached for his rifle. The beam vanished into the fog. Then came the faintest echo. Whup whup whup. Rotors, distant but closing. He looked up through the mist. The sound rolled across the valley like thunder wrapped in cloth. He didn't sleep. Not really. Just sat by the fire, watching shadows slide across the trees like ghosts changing their minds. The wind rose once, then died again. And somewhere in the distance, rotors pulsed through the fog, faint, rhythmic, deliberate. Not a storm. Not nature. Someone was searching. When dawn came, it was the color of steel. Dan poured the last of the coffee, its bitterness grounding him to something human. Bear stood near the trees, nose lifted, restless. The dog didn't bark. He never barked without reason. Dan tightened his pack straps, slung the rifle, and started toward home. The box weighed more than it should have, a silent anchor on his shoulder. He didn't know what it held, but every instinct screamed that carrying it was a mistake. Still, he didn't put it down. The cabin appeared through the mist like a memory, square, weathered, built to outlast men. Inside, the air smelled of pine smoke and oil. He bolted the door, set the box on the table, and just stared at it. The thing looked ordinary, dull metal, no markings except those faint letters. But it felt wrong. It had a presence. Like it was waiting. He fetched a crowbar from under the stove, wedged it into the latch, and forced it open with a metallic snap. The sound echoed unnaturally loud in the small room. Inside, plastic envelopes, neatly sealed. Papers. Photographs. Everything looked new. Untouched by years, untouched by weather. Dan froze. This wasn't debris from a decades-old crash. This was recent. He pulled one envelope out, held it to the light. Photos. A helicopter. The same helicopter. Taken from different angles. Clear sky, bright daylight. A date stamped in the corner, June 2022. He stared. No, this couldn't be. That machine had been buried for years. Decades maybe. Unless it hadn't. He opened another packet, typed pages, coordinates, routes, names he didn't recognize. Every line was clean, printed with military precision. But one detail stopped him cold. Department of Energy. Contractor Division. Not Army. Not Air Force. Doe. What the hell were you doing out here? He whispered. The room felt smaller suddenly. He plugged his old laptop into the wall socket, powered it on, and stared at the black case he'd found beneath the documents. Sleek, modern, unlike anything else in the box. It had a digital lock and a small data port on the side. He hesitated, then connected it. The screen flickered. Code. Layers of encryption. Then a warning in red letters. Unauthorized access detected. Password required. Dan's heartbeat hammered in his throat. He tried a few guesses. Dates, initials, random strings. Nothing. After the fifth attempt, the warning blinked again and vanished. The screen went black. For a long time, he just sat there, listening. Outside, wind moved through the trees. Bear shifted near the door, ears flicking. Then froze. A faint crunch, boots on gravel. Too steady to be an animal. Dan killed the light. The cabin plunged into darkness. He crouched near the window, rifle in hand. For a moment, nothing. Then a shadow moved past the tree line. Slow. Careful. A beam of light swept across the clearing once, then disappeared. Bear's growl was a low vibration in the air. Dan whispered, "Stay down." The hum came next, deep, smooth, unmistakable. Rotors. Close. Overhead. The windows rattled. Dust fell from the rafters. Then the sound drifted west, fading into the valley. He exhaled slowly, heart still racing. They were looking. Not lost. Not random. Looking. When silence returned, it wasn't comforting. It was heavy, loaded with the truth he didn't want to admit. Someone knew about the wreck. Someone had been here before him. And now, they knew he had the box. He looked at the black case on the table, faintly glowing in the dim light. The letters DOE shimmered like a threat. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't supposed to exist. He left before sunrise. Didn't pack much, just bullets, water, and the black case wrapped in oiled cloth. The cabin door swung shut behind him, and for a moment, he looked back at it. A place that had been home. Now, just a target waiting to burn. Bear walked ahead, alert and silent. The forest was grey with mist again, heavy with rain. Every breath turned to steam in the cold. Dan's instinct screamed the same word over and over, move. He didn't know how many of them there were, but they were trained. You could tell by the rhythm of their steps, the way the light moved last night, steady, measured, tactical. Not hunters. Not rangers. Professionals. They wanted the case. And they wanted it back quietly. Hours passed. The world narrowed to fog, pine, and heartbeat. Bear stopped often, nose to the wind, ears flicking. Sometimes he'd growl, soft, warning, more vibration than sound. Once, Dan found a print in the mud. Boot tread. Deep. Not his. They were closing in. He veered west, toward an old mining valley, a scar from another century. Rust and ruin, hidden in the folds of the mountains. If he could make it there, he'd have cover. Stone walls. Narrow tunnels. A place to breathe, maybe. By late afternoon, the sky bruised over with cloud. The air tasted of metal. Rain began, thin at first, then relentless. Dan climbed the last ridge and saw the mine, a black mouth under sagging timbers. Perfect. Terrible. But perfect. He slipped inside. The air changed immediately, cold, stale, full of echoes. Water dripped somewhere deep within. The lantern flickered weakly, casting a trembling circle of light. He sat against the wall, soaked and shaking. Bear lay beside him, breathing hard but quiet. The dog's eyes glowed faintly in the dark. Just for tonight, Dan whispered. "We'll move when it clears." But the rain didn't hide everything. Outside, somewhere beyond the entrance, something shifted. A scrape. A footstep. Then another. Bear stiffened, lips pulling back in silence. Dan killed the lantern. The darkness swallowed them whole. Light returned. Thin. Alien. A flashlight beam swept across the tunnel mouth. Then another. Then a red laser dot slid across the stone wall. Dan's breath caught. They were inside. He could hear voices now. Low, calm, coordinated. Not English. Short, coded bursts. 3, maybe 4 of them. Moving slow. Weapons ready. He backed deeper into the mine, one hand on the rifle, one on Bear's collar. They stepped in sync, their boots crunching on gravel. Professional cadence. He'd moved like that once too, in fires, in chaos, in death. These weren't scavengers. These were retrievals. The beam passed inches from his face. He didn't blink, didn't breathe. Then a pebble rolled under his boot. The sound was barely a whisper, but enough. A voice barked a command. Light snapped toward him. He fired first. The gunshot exploded through the tunnels, deafening, blinding. A cry followed, cut short. Then chaos, shouting, running, muzzle flashes ripping through the dark. Bear lunged forward, barking with fury. Dan dragged him back, reloading by feel. Bullets sparked off the walls, hot metal screaming. He turned and ran. Deeper. Always deeper. The mine split into 2 shafts, one narrow, one wide. He took the narrow one, knowing they'd expect the other. The tunnel climbed steeply, rocks crumbling under his boots. Ahead, a faint shimmer of grey. Light. An exit. "Come on, boy," he hissed. They reached it as more shots echoed below. He grabbed the rusted bars, pulled hard. Metal groaned, gave way. He shoved Bear through first, then crawled after him, lungs burning. Outside, the world was rain and wind and silver fog. He rolled into wet grass, gasping, the cold air slapping his face. Behind them, shouts faded into nothing. They didn't know the shaft reached the surface. Not yet. Dan pressed his hand to the mud, feeling the vibration of distant movement. They'd regroup. They'd come again. But not tonight. He looked at the case lying beside him. Its lock light blinked once. Alive. Waiting. He realized something then, something colder than the rain. The device wasn't just a container. It was talking back. Sending something. Somewhere. He exhaled, trembling. "They're not tracking me," he whispered. "They're tracking this." Bear whined softly. The forest around them seemed to lean closer, listening. The rain didn't stop. It fell in hard, slanted lines that erased footprints and washed blood into the earth. By morning, the forest was nothing but grey breath and whispering wind. Dan hadn't slept. His body ached, his nerves burned raw, but he kept moving, downhill, always south. Bear trotted beside him, silent but alert. The black case hung heavy on his shoulder, pulsing faintly through the cloth like a heartbeat. He didn't need to open it to know it was still alive. It was calling. By midday, they reached the burned valley. Trees here stood like skeletons, black and split, their bark turned to charcoal. The smell of old fire lingered, bitter and dry. In the middle of it all stood a shape barely standing. The old ranger station. Half the roof was gone. The radio tower still rose above the ruins, leaning but intact. If anything could reach beyond these mountains, it was up there. Dan pushed through the warped door, Bear following close. Inside was dust, mold, silence. Dead machines stared at him from rusted tables. He wiped grime off one, an old Collins transceiver, military grade, built to survive war. It might just survive this. He set the black case beside it and scanned the room for power. The main line was dead. But the old crank generator, still bolted to the floor, might work. He grabbed the handle and began to turn. The wheel fought back, stiff and reluctant. Then it caught. The lights flickered weakly, amber and uncertain. Static filled the speaker, thin, fragile, but alive. He adjusted the dial. Nothing. Then, a voice. Faint. Crackling through the storm. Station copy identify signal weak repeat. Dan's heart slammed against his ribs. He pressed the transmitter. "This is Private Party, Montana Backcountry. he said, breathless. Possible downed aircraft. Government markings. Unknown contents. I need civilian federal contact. Repeat, civilian. The response came seconds later, nearly lost in static. Copy transmission, weak, repeat coordinates. He hesitated. Couldn't risk it. They were listening too, the men, the helicopters, whoever they were. He had no way of knowing which voice belonged to rescue, and which to the hunters. He looked at Bear. The dog's ears pricked up, his body tense, eyes fixed on the doorway. Dan's instinct screamed. He dropped the MIC, grabbed the rifle. A flash, red light, slid across the far wall. Laser sight. Then everything broke loose. Gunfire shattered the windows. Wood splintered. The radio exploded into sparks. He hit the floor, dragging Bear behind an overturned table. Bullets chewed through the walls, the sound deafening. The black case slid across the floor, struck the wall, and landed upright. The small signal light blinked faster. It was transmitting. Dan swore under his breath, grabbed it, and slung it over his shoulder. He fired twice through the window, quick, precise. The return fire stopped. Just long enough. Out the back, he shouted. They ran. The rear door burst open into sheets of rain. Mud sucked at his boots as he scrambled up the slope behind the station. Gunfire flared again below, flashes of light in the downpour. Then, fire. An explosion. The station went up in a roar of heat and thunder. Orange light tore through the rain, devouring everything he'd built there. He kept climbing, lungs on fire, the world shaking behind him. At the ridge, he stopped. Looked back. The valley burned beneath the storm, flames twisting in the wind like desperate hands. Smoke rose into the clouds, swallowed by grey sky. He sank to his knees. Bear pressed close, panting, trembling. Dan's voice cracked when he spoke. "They're not after me, boy," he said softly. "They're after this." He pulled the case into his lap. Rain hissed against the metal. For a moment, he wanted to smash it open, throw it into the fire, erase it all. But then he thought of the pilot, the man who'd gone down with the helicopter, who'd hidden this so someone else could find it. That man hadn't died to bury the truth. He'd died to pass it on. Dan stood. The decision hit him like lightning. He would go back to the ravine. Back to the wreck. Whatever was inside the flight recorder might unlock the case, might explain everything. He turned toward the forest. The rain slowed, and mist began to lift from a valley below. And then, that sound again. Rotors. Close. Too close. The treetops swayed under the downdraft. A searchlight swept the hillside, white and blinding. Dan ducked behind a boulder, gripping Bear's collar. The helicopter hovered low, its beam crawling over the wet earth, tracing fire and shadow. Then it stopped. Held still. Right over him. The light flared red, infrared lock. "They found us," Dan whispered. He looked at Bear, then at the case. His voice dropped to a whisper. "If we die, they win. If we vanish, maybe not." He took a breath, heart hammering, and ran. Down the far side of the ridge, into the fog, into silence. The forest swallowed them whole. At dawn, the storm cleared. Only smoke remained, curling through the mountains like fading memory. In the ravine below, the wreck of the helicopter waited, silent, patient, eternal. And somewhere in that silence, a faint beat pulsed once. Then again. Steady. Alive. The hunt wasn't over. It had just changed direction.